Pack your things and get out of this house. You're not my daughter anymore." My father's words echoed through the living room of my childhood home, his face twisted with disgust and rage as he pointed toward the door. 23 members of my extended family stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to contempt to satisfaction, their judgment heavy in the air like a suffocating fog. My mother stood beside him with tears streaming down her face, but not tears of sadness for me, tears of shame, tears of betrayal, tears that said I'd destroyed everything she'd worked to build. And at the center of it all stood my sister Melissa, sobbing dramatically into her husband Derek's shoulder, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching his shirt as if she might collapse without his support. This was supposed to be their 5th wedding anniversary party. Instead, it had become my public execution. My name is Dr. Natalie Morrison, though I wasn't a doctor yet when this nightmare began. I'm 34 years old now, and what I'm about to tell you is the story of how one lie destroyed my entire life in the span of 20 minutes, and how 7 years later, the same people who threw me away came crawling back, begging for help they didn't deserve. But before I tell you what happened when they showed up at my door 7 years later, stay with me, because you need to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went and what I lost because of their choice to believe a lie without question. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment everything fell apart. It was a Saturday evening in October, and I was in my small graduate student apartment rehearsing my doctoral dissertation presentation. I was 27 years old, in my final year of a PhD program in molecular biology at Stanford University, and exactly 3 weeks away from defending my dissertation research on gene therapy applications for inherited blood disorders. This defense was everything: 6 years of brutal work, countless sleepless nights, sacrificed relationships, financial struggles, all leading to this one moment that would determine whether I'd earn my doctorate and move forward with the research position I'd been offered at a prestigious medical research institute. I was standing in my tiny living room, practicing my presentation slides on my laptop, speaking out loud to an audience of nobody, when my phone started ringing. I ignored it. I needed to get through this section on methodology without stumbling. But it rang again, and again. Then the texts started coming in rapid succession, my phone buzzing so continuously that I finally grabbed it in frustration. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages, all from family members. My stomach dropped even before I read any of the messages. Something was very, very wrong. I scrolled through the texts quickly, my hand starting to shake. From my Aunt Linda. "How could you do this to your sister?" From my cousin James. "You're sick." "Stay away from this family." From my Uncle Robert. "Your parents are devastated. I hope you're proud of yourself." From my mother. "Come to the house. Now. We need to deal with this immediately." I had absolutely no idea what this was. I'd barely spoken to anyone in my family for the past 2 weeks because I'd been completely consumed with my dissertation preparation. The last family event I'd attended was Melissa's anniversary party planning dinner 3 weeks ago, where we'd discussed decorations and catering. Everything had been completely normal. With trembling fingers, I called my mother back. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp and cold in a way I'd never heard directed at me before. "Get to the house right now, Natalie. Don't make this worse by making everyone wait." "Mom, what's going on? What happened?" My voice came out high and frightened. "You know exactly what happened. Get here now." She hung up. I stood there in my apartment, my dissertation slides still glowing on my laptop screen, my carefully prepared note cards scattered on the coffee table, my entire body shaking with confusion and fear. Should I go? Should I call someone else first to find out what this was about? Should I? My phone rang again. My father this time. I answered immediately. "Dad, please tell me what's happening. If you're not here in 30 minutes, don't bother coming at all. But this will be dealt with tonight, one way or another." His voice was ice cold, completely unlike the warm, supportive father I'd known my entire life. He hung up before I could respond. I grabbed my car keys with shaking hands and drove to my parents' house in a state of complete panic and confusion. If you've ever experienced that feeling of knowing something terrible has happened but having no idea what it is, you'll understand the nauseating anxiety that consumed me during that 20-minute drive. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone died? Was someone sick? Had I done something wrong without realizing it? But none of those scenarios explain the anger and accusation in those text messages. When I pulled up to my parents' large colonial house in their upscale neighborhood, I noticed immediately that there were at least 15 cars parked along the street and in the driveway. This was clearly not a small family meeting. This was everyone. The anniversary party had apparently turned into something else entirely. I walked up to the front door on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. Before I could even knock, the door swung open and my father stood there, his face red with anger, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. Living room. Now. He stepped aside barely enough for me to enter. I walked through the familiar entryway of my childhood, home and into the living room, and the scene that greeted me made my blood run cold. 23 family members, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, even my 90-year-old grandmother, were arranged around the room like a jury. Every eye turned to me as I entered, and the expressions ranged from fury to disgust to what looked almost like satisfaction on a few faces. And there, in the center of attention, sat my sister Melissa on the couch, her husband Derek's arm around her shoulders, her face red and puffy from crying, her whole body shaking with sobs. Melissa, I started toward her instinctively, my mind jumping to the conclusion that something had happened to her, that she was hurt or sick. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Don't you dare come near her." My mother's voice cracked like a whip, and I froze mid-step. "Don't you dare pretend you care about her after what you've done." "What I've done?" I looked around the room in complete confusion, my heart hammering. "I don't understand what's happening. Someone please tell me what's going on." My father moved to stand in the center of the room, positioning himself between me and Melissa like a barrier. When he spoke, his voice was cold and formal, like he was reading charges in a courtroom. "Derek came to us 2 hours ago with information about your behavior toward him. Information that Melissa has now confirmed. Information that has devastated this entire family." My mind was blank. "Information about my behavior toward Derek? I barely know Derek. I've maybe had 5 conversations with him in the 5 years he's been married to Melissa." "Stop lying!" Melissa screamed, jumping to her feet, her finger pointing at me accusingly. "Stop lying, Natalie. Just admit what you did. Admit that you've been trying to seduce my husband. Admit that you've been sending him inappropriate messages and pictures. Admit that you told him you could give him what I can't." The room spun. I actually swayed on my feet, grabbing the back of a nearby chair to steady myself. "What, Melissa? That's insane. I would never. Derek showed us the messages," my mother said, her voice breaking. "We've seen the evidence, Natalie. We've seen the photos you sent him. We've read the disgusting things you wrote. How could you do this to your own sister?" This had to be a nightmare. This couldn't be real. There are no messages. There are no photos. "I don't know what Derek showed you, but it wasn't from me. This is completely insane. Are you calling my husband a liar?" Melissa's voice went shrill. "Are you saying he fabricated text messages and photos? Why would he do that?" "I don't know." I was shouting now, my panic giving way to desperate anger. "But whatever he showed you, it wasn't from me. Check my phone. Check my records. I've barely even texted Derek except for group family messages." Derek spoke for the first time, his voice calm and sad, like he was the reasonable one in this situation. "Natalie, I know this must be embarrassing to have it all come out like this, but I had to tell Melissa and your parents. Your behavior over the past 6 months has become increasingly inappropriate and uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it, tried to handle it quietly, but when you sent those photos last week and told me you were in love with me, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. That never happened." I was screaming now, tears streaming down my face. "I never sent any photos. I never said I was in love with you. This is a complete fabrication." My father's voice cut through my protest like a blade. "Derek brought his phone. We all saw the messages from your number. We all saw the photos with your face clearly visible. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. Then the messages were faked somehow. The photos were manipulated. Please, you have to believe me." I looked around the room desperately, searching for one person, just one person who might doubt this story. But every face showed certainty in my guilt. My Aunt Carol spoke up from her seat near the window. Natalie, I think deep down you've always been jealous of Melissa. She's always been the pretty one, the social one, the one who got married first. I think you wanted what she had, and you convinced yourself you could take it. That's not true. But even as I protested, I could see heads nodding around the room. They were all buying into this narrative, this story that I was the jealous younger sister who'd tried to steal her sister's husband. If you're watching this and you've ever been falsely accused of something, you know the special kind of helplessness I felt in that moment. Truth didn't matter. Evidence didn't matter. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had already decided I was guilty. My grandmother, who I'd always been especially close to, spoke in a trembling voice. Natalie, I raised you better than this. I'm so disappointed I can barely look at you. That broke something in me. I collapsed into a chair, my legs finally giving out. Please, I whispered. Please just look at my phone. Check my actual text messages. You'll see I'm telling the truth. My father held out his hand. Fine, give me your phone. With shaking hands, I unlocked my phone and handed it to him. He scrolled through my messages while everyone waited in tense silence. I watched his face, praying he'd see that my message history with Derek was completely innocent. Just group family texts and maybe 3 individual messages over 5 years. All completely benign, but his expression didn't change. He looked at the phone, looked at Derek's phone that Derek handed him, then looked back at me with even deeper disgust. The numbers match, Natalie, and the messages on Derek's phone are from your number. That's not disputable. Then someone cloned my number or spoofed it or something. That's possible, right? I've read articles about that. I was grasping at straws, my voice desperate. Or, my mother said coldly, you deleted the messages from your phone after sending them, which is much more likely than some elaborate technical conspiracy. Melissa stood up again, her voice breaking with theatrical sobs. How could you, Natalie? I'm your sister. I've loved you and supported you your whole life. And you tried to destroy my marriage. You tried to take the person I love most in the world. And here's what nobody in that room knew. What I'm going to tell you now because it's important for understanding just how calculated this was. Stay with me here. Because this detail changes everything. Melissa and I had never been close. Not really. People talk about sister bonds and growing up best friends, but that wasn't our relationship. Melissa was 4 years older than me, and from the time we were children, there had been a bitter undercurrent of competition that she initiated and maintained throughout our entire lives. When I got straight A's in school, she'd tell our parents I was boring and had no social life. When I was accepted to Stanford for undergraduate, she made snide comments about how I was abandoning the family by going to California. When I got engaged briefly at age 24, that relationship ultimately didn't work out. Melissa had actually cried to our mother that I was trying to get married before her, trying to steal her thunder, even though she'd been dating Derek for less than 6 months at that point. When Melissa and Derek got married 3 years later, I was a bridesmaid, but she'd made it clear I was only included because excluding me would look bad to the family. During the wedding planning, she'd criticized everything about me, my weight, my hair, my lack of fashion sense, my focus on my PhD instead of real life, as she called it. But I'd tolerated it all because she was my sister, and because our parents always made excuses for her behavior. Melissa is just sensitive, they'd say. She doesn't mean it like that. You're the younger one. You need to be more understanding. So I'd been understanding for 27 years, and this was my reward. Standing in that living room, facing 23 family members who'd already convicted me without a trial, I realized something with horrible clarity. This was deliberate. Melissa had orchestrated this entire situation. But why? What did she gain from destroying me? That answer would come later. In that moment, all I could do was keep protesting my innocence to people who'd already made up their minds. I think you need to leave, my father said, his voice flat and final. Pack whatever belongings you have in this house and leave. You're not welcome here anymore. Dad, please. I stood up, reaching toward him. He actually stepped back, physically recoiling from me like I was contaminated. Don't call me that. You're not my daughter. My daughter would never betray her family like this. My mother was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. My Aunt Linda had her arm around Melissa, comforting her. Derek stood there with an expression of sad resignation. playing his role perfectly. The faithful husband who'd been victimized by his wife's predatory sister. I looked around that room one more time, searching desperately for anyone who might defend me, who might ask questions, who might demand actual proof beyond tampered phone records. But I saw only certainty in my guilt. "Fine," I said, my voice breaking. "I'll leave. But when the truth comes out, and it will come out, don't expect me to forgive any of you for this." "The truth is already out," my Uncle Robert said dismissively. "Now you just need to accept responsibility for what you've done." I walked upstairs to my old bedroom. I hadn't lived at home for 6 years, but I still had some belongings stored there. Clothes, books, photo albums, some childhood mementos. I threw everything into garbage bags with shaking hands, tears streaming down my face, my mind racing with disbelief and shock. This couldn't be happening. I had a dissertation defense in 3 weeks. I had research that could potentially help thousands of people with blood disorders. I had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, built toward this moment for 6 years. And now my entire family had disowned me based on lies, and I had no way to prove my innocence. As I was carrying my bags down the stairs, I heard Melissa's voice from the living room, pitched loud enough that I was clearly meant to hear. "I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again. My own sister tried to destroy my marriage. How do you recover from that level of betrayal?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst back into that room and force them to listen. But what would be the point? They'd made their decision. Nothing I said would change their minds. I loaded my bags into my car while family members watched from the windows, making sure I actually left. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Don't contact any of us. Don't come to family events. Don't try to explain or justify. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences. We'll pray for you, but we can't have you in our lives anymore." I drove back to my apartment in a complete daze, barely remembering the journey. When I got inside, I collapsed on my couch and finally let myself completely fall apart. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, until my throat was raw, until I had nothing left. But here's what none of them knew. And if you're still watching, this is where things get interesting, because I had something they'd underestimated. I had my mind. I had my intelligence, and I had the ability to focus on what mattered even when everything else was falling apart. After that night of complete breakdown, I made a decision. I couldn't control what my family believed. I couldn't force them to see the truth, but I could control what I did next. And what I was going to do next was defend my dissertation and become Dr. Natalie Morrison, regardless of whether I had a family to celebrate with. For the next 3 weeks, I threw myself into my work with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. I rehearsed my presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep. I anticipated every possible question my committee might ask. I refined my research data and conclusions until they were absolutely bulletproof. I also blocked every family member's number except my parents. I left those unblocked just in case they came to their senses and wanted to apologize. They never did. No calls, no texts, no attempts at reconciliation. My dissertation defense day arrived. I walked into that room completely alone. No family in the audience to support me. No one to celebrate with afterward. Just me, my committee, and 6 years of research that would speak for itself. And you know what? I absolutely crushed it. I presented my research on gene therapy applications with confidence and clarity. I answered every question my committee threw at me with precision and depth. I defended my methodology, my conclusions, my projections for future research. After 2 hours of intensive questioning and discussion, my committee chair smiled and said the words I'd worked so hard to hear. "Congratulations, Dr. Morrison. Your dissertation is approved." I'd done it. I'd earned my doctorate. I was Dr. Natalie Morrison, PhD in molecular biology, and I'd achieved it completely alone, without the family that had raised me, without the support system I'd always taken for granted. I went back to my apartment that night and allowed myself 1 glass of wine to celebrate. Then I called the research institute that had offered me a position and confirmed my start date. I was moving to Boston in 6 weeks to begin groundbreaking work in gene therapy research. Over the next 6 months, I rebuilt my entire life from scratch. I moved across the country to Boston. I started my research position at a prestigious medical institute. I found a beautiful apartment in a historic neighborhood. I made new friends who knew nothing about my family drama or the false accusations that had destroyed those relationships. and I threw myself into my work with everything I had. My research started producing results that exceeded even my own expectations. We made breakthroughs in gene therapy applications that got written up in major medical journals. I started getting invited to speak at conferences. My career was taking off in ways I'd always dreamed of. But I won't lie. There were dark times too. Nights when I'd scroll through old family photos and cry for what I'd lost. Holidays spent alone while I imagined my family gathering without me. Birthdays where no one called. The ache of being cut off from everyone I'd grown up with never completely went away. I also spent considerable time trying to figure out how Derek had faked those messages from my number. I consulted with tech experts. I read about phone spoofing and number cloning. I even hired a private investigator briefly to look into Derek's background. But without access to his actual phone or cooperation from my family, there was no way to prove what had really happened. The private investigator did turn up one interesting piece of information, though. Derek had substantial gambling debts that Melissa apparently didn't know about. He'd lost over $50,000 in online poker in the 6 months before the accusation. This information didn't directly prove he'd framed me, but it suggested he might have motivations I didn't understand. I sent this information to my parents, along with a detailed letter explaining everything from my perspective and begging them to at least consider the possibility that Derek had lied. I never received a response. 3 years passed this way. 3 years of building a successful career while carrying the weight of being cut off from my entire family. 3 years of achieving things I was proud of with no one to share them with. 3 years of wondering if the truth would ever come out. And then, something started to shift. My research team made a breakthrough that was significant enough to warrant mainstream news coverage. We'd successfully used gene therapy to treat a rare blood disorder in clinical trials, with results that were frankly revolutionary. The story was picked up by major news outlets. My name and photo were all over medical news websites and even some general interest publications. I didn't expect my family to see the coverage. I didn't expect them to care even if they did, but apparently, several of my aunts and cousins saw the articles and started asking questions. How could Natalie be doing such important work if she was the morally bankrupt person they'd believed her to be? How could someone who'd tried to seduce her sister's husband be trusted with groundbreaking medical research? The cognitive dissonance started creating cracks in the narrative. I heard all of this secondhand through my private investigator, who I'd kept on retainer to monitor my family's situation. Not because I wanted to interfere in their lives, but because I needed to know if anything changed that might vindicate me. And then, 4 years after the accusation that destroyed my life, the truth finally started to emerge. If you've stuck with me this far, hit that like button, because what I'm about to tell you shows that sometimes karma really does work, just not on the timeline we expect. Derek left Melissa, not for another woman, not because of problems in their marriage. He just disappeared one day with several $1,000s he'd taken from their joint savings account, leaving behind a note that said he couldn't do it anymore. He was sorry, and she shouldn't try to find him. Melissa was, understandably devastated. She called my parents sobbing, and the whole family rallied around her once again, just like they'd rallied around her 4 years earlier, when she'd accused me of trying to seduce her husband. But this time, with Derek gone and unable to maintain his lies, things started to unravel. Melissa, in her grief and anger, went through every piece of Derek's life that he'd left behind. His laptop, his papers, his old phones that he'd kept in drawers. And on one of those old phones, she found something interesting. An app. A very specific app designed to spoof phone numbers and send texts that appeared to come from any number you programmed in. According to my private investigator, who heard this from a cousin who was actually present for the discovery, Melissa at first didn't understand what she was looking at. She took the phone to my father and asked him what this app was for. My father, who works in telecommunications, understood immediately. And apparently, his face went pale when he realized the implications. This was the app Derek had used to create fake text messages from my number. This was the evidence that I'd been telling the truth all along. But even with this discovery, my family didn't immediately contact me. Want to know why? Because admitting they'd been wrong meant admitting they'd destroyed their relationship with their daughter, sister, niece, cousin, based on lies they'd accepted without question. It meant admitting they'd disowned me, cut me off completely, and refused to even consider my perspective for 4 years. That's a hard thing to face about yourself. So instead, they sat on this information. They talked among themselves about what to do. They debated whether the app really proved what it seemed to prove. Maybe Derek had the app for legitimate reasons. Maybe I'd still sent some inappropriate messages, even if not all of them were real. Maybe. The justifications people create to avoid confronting their own terrible behavior are truly impressive. But then something happened that forced their hand and brought everything crashing down in a way they couldn't ignore or rationalize away. Melissa had a breakdown. A complete psychological breakdown that required hospitalization. In the psychiatric hospital, working with therapists, the truth finally came out. The whole truth. Not just that Derek had framed me, but why Melissa had gone along with it. Are you ready for this? Because this is the part that made me realize the depth of betrayal went so much deeper than I'd understood. Melissa had known. She'd known from the beginning that I hadn't tried to seduce Derek. She'd known the messages were fake. She'd helped Derek plan the whole thing. Why? Why would a sister do something so horrifically cruel to her own sibling? Jealousy. Pure, toxic, consuming jealousy. According to what came out in her therapy sessions, which my mother later related to me, Melissa had spent her entire adult life feeling inferior to me. While I was getting advanced degrees and doing important research, she was working as an administrative assistant and defining herself entirely through her marriage. When I was getting attention for my academic achievements, she felt overlooked and diminished. When I was close to defending my dissertation and starting a prestigious research position, she couldn't handle the idea that I would be Dr. Morrison while she was just Derek's wife. She wanted to destroy me before I could achieve that milestone. She wanted to take away my family support system right when I needed it most, hoping I'd fail my dissertation defense, or at least that I'd be so emotionally devastated that my success would be tainted and incomplete. Derek had gone along with it because of his gambling debts. Melissa had promised to use her trust fund. Yes, she had a trust fund from our grandmother that I didn't know about, to pay off his debts if he helped her execute this plan. She'd helped him set up the fake messages using the spoofing app. She'd coached him on what to say. She'd practiced her crying and her accusations. It had all been deliberate, calculated, and devastatingly effective, and our parents, our extended family, they'd all believed it without question because it fit their existing narrative that Melissa was the victim and I was the difficult, ambitious one who didn't prioritize family. When all of this came out, when Melissa's therapists shared what they ethically could with my parents, when the undeniable truth finally emerged, only then did my family try to contact me. I was in a research meeting when my phone started buzzing with calls from my parents' numbers. Numbers I still hadn't blocked, even after 4 years of silence, because some small part of me had always hoped they'd realize the truth. I ignored the calls initially. I was in the middle of presenting data to our research team. But after the meeting ended and I saw 17 missed calls and a voicemail from my mother, I finally listened to the message. Her voice was shaking, thick with tears. Now we knew the truth. We knew what really happened. We knew Derek and Melissa lied. Please, we need to talk to you. We need to explain. Her voice broke off into sobs. I sat in my office staring at my phone, feeling absolutely nothing. No relief that they finally believed me. No satisfaction that I'd been vindicated. No rush of forgiveness or desire for reconciliation, just numbness. 4 years. 4 years of building a life without them. 4 years of learning to be okay with being alone. 4 years of achieving incredible things in my career, while carrying the weight of their rejection. And now they wanted to talk? I didn't call back that day, or the next day, or the day after that. The calls and messages kept coming. From my mother, my father, my Aunt Linda, who'd been particularly cruel during the confrontation, my cousins who'd sent hateful texts, all of them wanting to apologize, to explain, to ask for forgiveness. I finally called my mother back 2 weeks later, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I needed to hear what they had to say with my own ears. Natalie. My mother started crying the moment she heard my voice. Oh my God, Natalie. I'm so sorry. We're all so sorry. We were so wrong. We should have believed you. We should have questioned. You should have acted like my family, I said, my voice cold and flat. You should have given me the benefit of the doubt. You should have done the bare minimum of investigating before destroying me. I know, she sobbed. I know, there's no excuse for what we did. Melissa has confessed everything. Derek admitted to the gambling debts and the fake messages. We know the whole story now, and we feel sick about how we treated you. You feel sick, I repeated. You feel bad. That's interesting, because I felt destroyed. I felt completely alone during one of the most important moments of my life. I defended my dissertation with none of you there. I started my career with none of you to celebrate with. I spent 4 years wondering if I'd ever have a family again. But you feel sick, so I guess that makes it all better. No, it doesn't make it better. Nothing can make this better. My mother's voice was desperate now. But we want to try. We want you back in our lives. We want to make amends somehow. Please, Natalie. You're our daughter. We love you. You don't get to love me now, I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded. You don't get to decide that now that you know the truth, everything can go back to normal. You made a choice 4 years ago to believe the worst about me without evidence. You made a choice to cut me off completely. You made a choice to not even consider that you might be wrong. Those were your choices, and you don't get to just undo them now because it's convenient. What can we do? My father's voice came through. She must have put me on speaker. Tell us what we can do to fix this. Nothing, I said simply. There's nothing you can do. You can't give me back the 4 years you took from me. You can't undo the pain you caused. You can't make me trust you again. The damage is permanent. I hung up before they could respond. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. My family, now armed with guilt and desperation for absolution, launched a campaign to win me back. Letters arrived at my apartment. Emails flooded my inbox. Flowers were delivered to my office. My Aunt Linda showed up at my apartment building one day, and the doorman had to escort her out when I refused to come down to see her. The letters were particularly interesting because they revealed just how much my family had been affected by the discovery of the truth. My father wrote about how he'd had to face that his judgment had been catastrophically wrong, and how it had shaken his confidence in himself. My mother wrote about the guilt that consumed her every day. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins wrote their own versions of, "We're sorry. We should have believed you. Please forgive us." But notably absent from this campaign was Melissa herself. I learned through these letters that Melissa was still in intensive therapy, dealing with the psychological issues that had led her to orchestrate such a cruel plan. She was apparently too emotionally fragile to contact me directly, though my mother's letters repeatedly mentioned that Melissa wanted me to know how sorry she was. 3 years passed this way. 3 years of my family trying to force their way back into my life while I kept them firmly at arm's length. 3 years of guilt-driven attempts at reconciliation that I rejected over and over. 3 years of me focusing on my research, my career, and the life I'd built without them. And you know what? I was genuinely okay. I'd made peace with being alone. I had colleagues who were friends. I had a cat named Watson who was better company than most humans. I had work that mattered and achievements I was proud of. I didn't need them anymore. But then, 7 years after that night when they'd thrown me out of their house, something happened that changed everything. My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, aggressive, fast-moving, with a prognosis of 6 to 18 months, and suddenly, all those apologetic letters and guilt-driven calls took on a new tone of desperation. If you're still watching, drop a comment telling me what you would do in this situation, because what I decided changed everything, and I need to know if you think I made the right choice. The call came from my father at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I almost didn't answer. By this point, 7 years after the accusation, 3 years after the truth had come out, I'd gotten very good at ignoring my family's attempts at contact. But something made me pick up that day. Maybe intuition, maybe just tired resignation. "Natalie." My father's voice was hollow, aged in a way I hadn't heard before. "Your mother has cancer. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors are saying 6 to 18 months. She's asking for you. She wants to see you before she doesn't have time left." I stood in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, processing this information. My mother was dying. The woman who'd given birth to me, raised me, and then disowned me based on lies. She was dying and wanted to see me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. And I was sorry. Regardless of our history, I didn't want her to suffer, but that didn't mean I was ready to rush to her bedside and pretend the past 7 years hadn't happened. "Will you come see her?" My father's voice cracked. "Please, Natalie. She knows what she did was unforgivable. But she's dying, and she wants to make peace with you before the end." "I need to think about it," I said. "This isn't a simple decision for me. She doesn't have time for you to think about it." His voice rose with frustration and fear. "The cancer is aggressive. She might only have weeks, not months. If you're going to see her, it needs to be soon." "Then I guess she should have thought about that before she disowned me for 4 years over a lie she chose to believe without question," I said, and hung up. I know that sounds harsh. Maybe it was harsh. But I'd spent 7 years learning to protect myself from people who'd proven they would hurt me without hesitation. And I wasn't going to just drop those defenses because death was making everyone sentimental and desperate for absolution. Over the next week, the calls and messages intensified. Not just from my father, but from the entire extended family again. But this time the tone was different. This time, they weren't just apologizing for past mistakes. They were trying to use my mother's impending death as leverage to force forgiveness I didn't feel. From my Aunt Linda, "Your mother is dying and you won't even visit her? That's cruel beyond words. I thought you were better than this." From my cousin James, "Whatever happened in the past, she's still your mother. She's dying. You'll regret it forever if you don't make peace with her now." From my Uncle Robert, "This is your last chance to be the bigger person. Don't let stubbornness and pride keep you from doing the right thing." The emotional manipulation was extraordinary. Suddenly I was the bad guy again. Not for anything I'd actually done, but for not immediately forgiving people who'd spent years treating me like I didn't exist. But here's what none of them seemed to understand. Forgiveness isn't something you can demand from someone, especially not on a timeline that's convenient for you. You can't abuse someone for years and then expect them to immediately offer absolution the moment it becomes important to you. I talked to my therapist about all of this. Yes, I'd been in therapy for years working through the trauma of familial rejection. Dr. Chen listened to everything I told her, then asked a simple question. "What do you want to do, Natalie? Not what they want you to do, not what you think you should do. What do you actually want?" And the answer, when I was honest with myself, was complicated. Part of me wanted to tell them all to go to hell, that they'd made their choices and now had to live with the consequences just like they'd told me to do 7 years ago. Part of me wanted to go see my mother, not to forgive her, but to finally tell her in person exactly how much damage she'd caused. And part of me, the small part that still remembered being loved by her before everything fell apart, wanted some kind of closure before she died. I told Dr. Chen, "I need to see her, not because she deserves it, but because I need to say certain things before I lose the chance. I need to tell her what she took from me. I need her to understand that her choices had permanent consequences. And then I need to walk away with a clear conscience, knowing I did what was right for me, not what was easy for her." Dr. Chen nodded. "That sounds like you're thinking clearly about your own needs, rather than being controlled by their demands. Whatever you decide, make sure it's your decision." So 2 weeks after my father's initial call, I drove the 3 hours back to my hometown for the first time in 7 years. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't want the whole family gathering to witness whatever this meeting was going to be. This was between me and my mother. When I arrived at my parents' house, my father answered the door. He looked like he'd aged 15 years. Gray hair now, deep lines in his face, a hunched quality to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Natalie." He tried to hug me, but I stepped back, keeping physical distance. His face fell, but he nodded understanding. "Thank you for coming. She's upstairs in the bedroom. The cancer has progressed quickly. She's weak, but she's been insistent about staying lucid enough to talk to you." I walked through the familiar house toward the stairs, passing the living room where I'd been publicly destroyed 7 years ago. The furniture was the same. The photos on the walls were the same, except now they included pictures of Melissa looking thin and haunted. Pictures from family gatherings I hadn't been invited to. 7 years of family history that had continued without me. My mother was in the master bedroom, propped up on pillows, an oxygen tube in her nose, medications lined up on the nightstand. She'd lost significant weight. Her skin had a grayish tinge. and her eyes had the sunken quality of someone whose body was shutting down. But when she saw me standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears, and her face transformed with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Relief? Gratitude? Desperate hope? "Natalie," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. "You came. Thank God you came." I stayed in the doorway, not approaching the bed. "I came because I have things I need to say to you before you die. Not because I forgive you, not because we're going to have some tearful reconciliation, but because I need you to understand what you did to me, and I need to say it while you can still hear it." Her hand dropped back to the blanket. "Okay," she said softly. "I understand. Say whatever you need to say." I took a breath, organizing 7 years of pain into words. 7 years ago, you chose to believe that I, your daughter who had never done anything to warrant your distrust, had tried to seduce my sister's husband. You didn't ask for my side of the story. You didn't demand proof. You didn't question the convenient timing or wonder why I would do something so completely out of character. You just believed the worst about me immediately and completely. She was crying now, but I continued. You threw me out of this house. You told me I wasn't your daughter anymore. You let 23 family members believe I was this terrible person who'd betrayed her own sister. And then you all cut me out of your lives entirely. No phone calls, no birthday wishes, no checking in to see if I was okay. Nothing. For 4 years, I was dead to you. We were wrong, she tried to interject. I'm not finished, I said firmly. You were wrong, yes. But it's not just that you were wrong, it's that you didn't care enough to question whether you might be wrong. For 4 years, even though you had doubts, and Dad admitted in one of his letters that he'd had doubts, you never reached out. You never asked yourself whether the daughter you'd raised for 27 years really seemed like someone who would do what I was accused of. You just wrote me off. I moved slightly closer to the bed but still maintained distance. I defended my dissertation alone. I started my career alone. I spent 4 Thanksgivings alone, 4 Christmases alone, 4 birthdays alone. And I learned something during those years. I learned that I didn't actually need you. I learned that I could build a successful, meaningful life without the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, but who turned out to love me very conditionally indeed. My mother's shoulders were shaking with sobs now. My father had appeared in the doorway behind me, but I didn't turn around. And then the truth came out, I continued. And suddenly you all wanted me back. Suddenly you were sorry. Suddenly you understood what you'd done wrong. But where was that understanding 4 years earlier? Where was that willingness to question and investigate when it actually mattered? You only cared about the truth when it became undeniable, when you couldn't rationalize it away anymore. What can I do? My mother whispered brokenly. Tell me what I can do to make this right before I die. Nothing, I said simply. There's nothing you can do. You can't give me back those years. You can't undo the damage. You can't make me trust you again. The relationship we had is gone, Mom. It died 7 years ago in that living room when you chose to believe Melissa over me. So you'll just let me die without forgiveness? She was sobbing openly now. You'll let me go to my grave knowing my daughter hates me. And here's where I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. Stay with me because this is important. I don't hate you, I said, and realized as I said it that it was true. I don't hate you or Dad or any of them. Hate requires caring, and I've spent 7 years learning how to not care. You're just people who used to be my family but aren't anymore. I don't wish you harm. I don't sit around thinking about revenge. I just don't have space in my life for people who prove they can't be trusted. My father finally spoke from behind me. Natalie, your mother is dying. Surely you can find it in your heart to... I turned to face him. To what, Dad? Forgive and forget? Pretend the last 7 years didn't happen? Show up to family dinners and act like we're all okay now? Why would I do that? So you can all feel better about yourselves? So Mom can die with a clear conscience? Those are your needs, not mine. What about basic human compassion? He asked, his voice rising. What about mercy? What about being the bigger person? I am being the bigger person, I replied calmly. I drove 3 hours to come here even though every instinct told me not to. I'm standing here having this conversation, instead of just ignoring your calls like I've done for years. I'm telling you honestly how I feel instead of lying to make you comfortable. That is being the bigger person. What you're asking for isn't mercy or compassion. It's absolution. And that, I can't give you." My mother's voice came weakly from the bed. "If you won't forgive me, will you at least tell me you understand that I'm sorry? That I know what I did was wrong?" I looked at her. This woman who was dying, who'd given me life and then taken away my family. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "I believe you regret what you did. But being sorry doesn't erase the consequences of your actions. You taught me that lesson 7 years ago when you told me to deal with the consequences of my supposed choices. Now you have to deal with the consequences of yours." I turned to leave but paused at the doorway. "For what it's worth, I hope your final months aren't full of suffering. I hope you have good pain management and peaceful days. I don't wish you harm, Mom. I just can't give you the absolution you're looking for. That's not cruelty. It's just reality." As I walked down the stairs, I heard my father following me. "Natalie, wait. There's something else. Something you should know before you leave." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "What?" "Melissa is here. In the guest room. She's been staying here to help care for your mother. She wants to talk to you too. She's been too afraid to reach out directly, but absolutely not," I said immediately. I came to say what I needed to say to Mom. I'm not interested in seeing Melissa. I'm especially not interested in hearing whatever apology she's prepared. She's changed, Natalie. The therapy has helped her. She understands what she did was evil. She wants to make amends. I finally turned to look at him. Melissa orchestrated a plan to destroy my life because she was jealous of my success. She deliberately framed me, coached her husband on how to lie convincingly, and watched me be disowned by my entire family without saying a word. That's not a mistake, Dad. That's not even just cruelty. That's calculated evil, and no amount of therapy changes what she did. People can change, he insisted desperately. She's not the same person she was. Good for her, I said. I hope she has a wonderful, changed life. But it's a life that doesn't include me. I'm done, Dad, with all of you. I came today because I needed closure, not reconciliation. I've said what I needed to say. Now I'm leaving and I won't be back. Even when your mother dies? His voice broke. You won't even come to her funeral? I thought about that for a moment. I don't know, maybe not. But if I do come, it won't be for you or for Melissa or for anyone else in the family. It'll be for me to close a final chapter. And I certainly won't be participating in any family gathering afterward, where everyone pretends we're all okay now. I walked to my car with my father calling after me, begging me to reconsider, to give them another chance, to let them be my family again. I got in, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The 3-hour drive home gave me time to process what had just happened. I'd finally said everything I needed to say. I'd told my dying mother exactly how much damage she'd caused. I'd refused to offer the easy forgiveness they all desperately wanted. And I felt peaceful, not happy, not vindicated, not even particularly satisfied, just peaceful. I'd spent 7 years rebuilding my life after my family had destroyed it. I'd become Dr. Natalie Morrison despite their absence, not because of their eventual apology. I'd achieved incredible things in my research field. I'd learned to be okay on my own. I'd built a life that didn't need their validation or approval. And now, having faced them one final time, I could move forward knowing I'd done what was right for me, rather than what was convenient for them. My mother died 6 weeks later. My father called to tell me, his voice mechanical and distant. He didn't ask if I was coming to the funeral. I think he already knew the answer. I didn't go. I sent flowers with a card that said simply, "May you rest in peace," and then I continued with my life. The family sent letters after her death, some angry that I hadn't attended the funeral, some still trying to convince me to reconcile with them, some finally accepting that I meant what I'd said about being done with them all. Melissa sent one letter, forwarded through my father since I'd never given her my address. It was 20 pages long, detailing her therapy journey, her regrets, her understanding of how sick she'd been to do what she'd done. She begged for a chance to apologize in person, to make amends somehow, to have me in her life again. I read it once, then threw it away. Some bridges once burned should stay burned, and you know what? 7 years after being destroyed by my family's willingness to believe lies, 4 years after the truth came out, and several months after refusing to offer deathbed forgiveness, I'm okay. More than okay. I'm thriving. My research continues to break new ground. I was recently promoted to lead researcher at my institute. I've published papers in major journals. I've spoken at conferences around the world. I bought a beautiful house. I have friends who are real family, the kind who would question accusations, who would demand proof, who would give me the benefit of the doubt. I learned something valuable through this horrific experience. You don't owe forgiveness to people who hurt you just because they've decided they're sorry. You don't have to sacrifice your peace for their comfort. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Sometimes the most merciful thing you can do for yourself and for them is to simply walk away and let the consequences of their actions stand without trying to minimize or erase them. My family wanted me to forgive them so they could feel better about themselves. But my job wasn't to make them feel better. My job was to protect myself and honor the truth of what had happened. And that's exactly what I did. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. Drop a comment telling me whether you think I was too harsh or whether I did the right thing by refusing to forgive them. I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you're going through something similar, if you've been falsely accused, if your family has turned on you, if you've been asked to forgive people who haven't really earned it, know that you're not alone. Know that it's okay to prioritize your own well-being. Know that you don't owe anyone forgiveness just because they've decided it's time. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away and build a life so good that their absence becomes irrelevant. That's what I did. And I'd do it again.